Thank you, Lenka, for your presentation. I would just like to make a comment. I very much like this presentation that Lenka often gives, because there are really very simple things that help a lot. And I apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Leona Melicharova. I'm the project manager, and I joined this project a year ago. And before that, I had been buying new crayons, new erasers for my son, because he had been breaking everything all the time. And after I figured out that you can actually get the fidget toys for children to play with rather than with the crayons or pencil sharpeners, we've saved a lot of money on crayons and other things. The effect of the fidget toys is really huge. I can only recommend them. Now I would like to invite a colleague, Madam Marvánová Vargová of ROSA organization. She's the head of social advisory, and unfortunately she cannot be here in person. So she will present online.
Of the room full of people, I really appreciate that. Obviously, the atmosphere there is very positive, and I hope that the day will be productive for all of you, and you'll get all the information you want to get. As it's been mentioned, ROSA, the Center for Women, is a partner of a program called PORT. And we are very happy for that, because this project focuses, among others, on prevention of gender violence and domestic violence. It's an area which we are dedicated to, and I'm a psychologist, a therapist, and I've been working at ROSA since the year 2000. ROSA had been founded already in 1993. We're celebrating 30 years of our existence now. In our center, just for your information, we are providing 3 services. 2 of them are registered social services, and 1 is provided under the umbrella of a project, and we are in the process of registering it. One is a project for victims of domestic violence. One is the so-called safe home or safe house, where women can move with their children. And under the umbrella of a new project, we started running a crisis center, a part of which is a non-stop 24-hour free of charge line, 800 60 50 80. So it's an 800 number, and anybody can call that number from the Czech Republic, but also from abroad. And it's open not only for victims or potential victims, but also for professionals, teachers, whoever, neighbors, whomever needs help, advice, or information concerning gender or domestic violence. If you have any problems at work, if you have any questions concerning violence, please turn to us. We also offer a crisis stay. It's a 7-day stay, which we can offer free of charge to victims. It's combined with the safe house with a secret address. Sometimes we have victims who really need immediate help, for example, after being attacked. We take them in for 7 days for this crisis stay, and then we can move them to the safe house with a secret address. So this is just in brief to present our organization. As you can see from the title of my presentation, and also from the content of our work, we focus primarily on domestic violence, on children who are either victims or witnesses of domestic violence, and also on competences and roles of schools and teachers who can help children, who are actually the first ones, usually the first ones who learns about problems in the family, or the first ones whom the child confides into. It's a sensitive issue, domestic violence, and many people feel reluctant to speak about it. They don't know how to speak about it, and many people, when they learn about domestic violence, they find very reluctant to react. They don't know how to react. They don't know how to talk about it. They don't have the right vocabulary, that they don't know how to react. And that usually stops them from intervening. They'd rather stay out of it. And therefore, I should like to comment on practical tips, practical advice, what to do when you learn that a child in your class is a victim of domestic violence or a witness of such violence. There is a number of reactions which we recommend, and I would like you to know about them. To start with, let's define what you are talking about. Domestic violence is all acts of physical, sexual, psychological, or economic violence that happens within a family or between former or current spouses or partners, regardless of whether they share a household or not. It's a bit wider definition than the criminal law definition, which that's section 199 of the criminal law, which actually insists on that the victim and the perpetrator live under one roof. You probably realize, or you probably are aware of the fact that violence does not end when the victim and the perpetrator stop living under one roof. That, sometimes it starts at that very moment. Definitely it does not stop at that moment. The violence is more due to the relationship in between the two, in between the former or current spouses or partners. The wider definition sometimes also includes violence committed against children, abuse, negligence, etc. Most of domestic violence is violence between spouses or partners. Victims are out of 90% women, out of 10% men. Violence in close relationships is usually cyclic. It's not that it's happening 24 hours a day, so to speak, 7 days a week, but it's usually three phases: escalation of the problem, violence, and de-escalation of the problem. The reason why I'm saying it is that children are living in families which are struck by violence are witnessing these cycles and all the demonstrations of the cycles. And the demonstrations are really sometimes very grave, and we as teachers, or you as teachers, can observe that there are periods when the child is quite okay, no signs of problems in the family, and then when the pressure is increasing, when the situation is escalating, or when the violence actually happens, the child will start showing visible signs of stress, which is definitely caused by the violence in the family. A bit more to the theoretical introduction. When we are working with victims, we use yet another definition which we find very important, because it actually captures the essence of violence. And it says that it's behavior that causes one partner to fear the other. Domestic violence is not about the fact that the violator wants to be violent. No, the violator is using violence to assume control and maintain control over the victim. It's about abuse of control and power, and it's about actually trying to get the victim under control and isolate the person socially and deprive the person economically. The control and power, especially the social isolation, can be observed in children, actually. We see children isolated and strictly controlled by the perpetrator together with the victim, the primary victim. Looking at the key facts from the Czech Republic concerning domestic violence, surveys have revealed repeatedly that violence in close relationships is quite common. 1 in 3 women experience violence in relationship in their life. It can happen at any age. Looking at the figures, how many men and women and children experience domestic violence currently, it's 321,000 women who in the past 12 months were exposed to incidents of domestic violence and expressed fear and claimed that home was not a safe place for them. When looking at more statistics, you can see that about the same number of children are living in households that are struck with domestic violence. Statistically speaking, in every classroom, you've got at least 1 to 2 children who witness domestic violence. It was mentioned by Klára Laurenčíková at the beginning that statistically speaking, you've got at least 1 to 2 kids in every classroom who is in danger of domestic violence. Just for your information, we know that only 8% of victims report the most serious violence to the police. And that actually shows that it's just the top of the iceberg. It's a really latent crime, and that's why it is extremely important that not only the police which have wide competences intervening, but healthcare professionals, social workers, teachers, counselors, and other people are well informed about domestic violence, because they can actually be the ones, the victim or the child who is exposed to domestic violence will turn to, or they should be the ones who notice the warning signals that there is domestic violence in the family. If we look closer at children who grow up in families where violence in close relations is committed, we see that the statistics are rather alarming. We've got quite a lot of data available to us, and we regularly update our statistics as we get more and more clients coming to our asylum facility or calling the crisis hotline. We know that domestic violence is a daily reality for many children. Children are witnesses in more than 90% of cases. According to the World Health Organization, the more presence of children in domestic violence is considered psychological abuse. Just the presence of children. Children can be in the adjacent room or can be in the room, can be present or can be indirectly present, and still they are considered victims of violence. The Ministry of Health 2008 newsletter reads that children witnessing domestic violence are considered as abused, exploited, and neglected. There are real negative impacts on children living in the environment where domestic violence happens on regular basis. But what is really important to realize is that psychological and physical development of children living in such households is threatened for the whole life of theirs. These children live in constant tension. And this tension and fear makes them lose the feelings of safety. They often say that the behavior of the perpetrator is really unpredictable. And we've heard here how important it is for children to live in predictable environment. Children need to have things under control in inverted commas. But in a household where domestic violence is perpetrated, children actually lose control over the feeling of safety and security. And they feel that their parents cannot help them meet their basic needs. And the main reason is unpredictability. The children cannot tell when the violence will happen or when it will not happen. Children react to domestic violence differently. We see that in about 25% of children try to intervene in incidents. They try to protect the victim. 10% of children are injured in a violent accident in which they try to intervene. And but on the other hand, there are other children whose strategy is different. They identify with the aggressor, and in about 2% they side with the aggressor, and they can actually become co-perpetrators. For example, we had this 16-year-old boy as a client who was perpetrating violence against the mother together with the father, because the father was supporting him to attack the mother. And it's actually a strategy of adapting in a way. It's a survival strategy for the boy. And maybe yet another important figure is that at cases where the police intervene, it's quite few cases, unfortunately, in 53% of cases which are actually investigated by the police, there are children under age of 12 present.
And I have already said that also according to the World Health Organization, children who witness violence in their family show similar symptoms like children who have been affected by CAN. So we may identify different symptoms like inattention that may be caused by lack of sleep or acute stress reaction, or after a violent accident, to fluctuation of focus, increased fatigue, apathy, sadness. And one of the frequent symptoms may be increased alertness or some kind of withdrawal reactions. And of course, it can actually accelerate to aggressive behavior in the children, because we know that children may use the aggression as there is the transgenerational occurrence of violence. So children who witness violence and aggressive behavior in their family may be aggressive either towards their friends or in their partnerships. I would, in speaking about the impacts on how children feel this, and for feeling shared responsibility of what is happening in the family, I would like to say that especially younger children, preschool children and young school children, often lack or do not go through the magic realism phase, and sometimes they think that in the morning the sun goes up or sun rises because they are getting up, and the sun sets in the evening because they go to bed, and they cannot properly understand situations. They cannot understand why someone who is close to them, who is related to them, whom they love, somehow can be violent towards them or their mother, for example. And then the explanation of the situation is usually, they usually find the explanation within themselves. They feel being responsible for the violence. And this is very important to bear in mind when talking to a child that we're talking to, and we have to reassure such children that they are in no way responsible for the violence or aggression, that it's the aggressor who is responsible for the violent behavior. And this is very important also when you're trying to solve bullying, for example, within the classroom and similar situations. Just briefly, how the domestic violence affect children of different age, because of course the effect or the impact is very individual first, and age is one of the factors that affects how the child will be affected, what the impacts will be, and how it will affect the behavior of children. And with the smallest children, babies, infants, really, in these children, we often witness problems with attachment, because this critical need of the child may not be satisfied, and the symptoms may be increased crying, problems with food intake, problems with sleep, and problems with regulation of the basic physiological needs, really. With the infants, there's also an increased risk of physical injury, of course. When we look at the situation from the development perspective, the younger the child is when he or she is exposed or witnesses violence, and the longer this situation takes, the more seriously the development of the child is affected, and development trauma may actually develop in such children. So it's important to bear in mind that we can also see a child that is not at risk anymore, but it will still bear the history of the developmental trauma. For example, it may be child of a mother who left an abusive relationship, but the child still bears the experience with him or her, and we can actually start talking or working with a child when there's no acute risk, but the symptoms will still be there. For preschool children, the symptoms often include psychosomatic problems, regressive behavior. School children may often display psychosomatic problems and some social, like they may have difficulties to establish relationships, to engage in relationships. For adolescents, the symptoms may include also problems on the interpersonal level. They may get themselves into conflict situations. They may behave in a violent way. And since we are running out of time now, and I know that there's a coffee break scheduled for you, and you've heard a lot since the beginning of the conference, I would like to speak just very briefly about the role of school in case in case a child experiences domestic violence, because very often school may be the only safe environment for the child. And in one of our therapeutic groups, we had a small boy, second grade boy, who said that he likes coming to school because it's the only place where he feels safe. And one girl said that the eye contact with her teacher was one single thing that helped her most in the time before her mom managed to leave the abusive relationship, and before her mom left the aggressor with the children and found a safe space. The teacher was like a lighthouse for the girl, a beacon, a guarantor of safety. Now, what are the competences and the role of the school itself? The school should watch out for symptoms of domestic violence and aggression. So they should listen to the child when he or she says that there may be some symptoms or expressions of domestic violence in their family, when they notice that something may be going on out of school, it's important to talk to the child how to keep safe, not only at school, not only out of school, but also at home. And it's also important to talk to the victim of the violence, because you're actually in touch with a parent at parent-teacher meetings, for example. But sometimes it's important to talk directly to the affected parent and to provide the affected parent by information about organizations that can help. When talking to the child, it's important to appreciate and acknowledge that it is important to speak about some things, and that the child was brave enough to speak about it. And I would like to highlight one thing in here, and we will give you the presentation, so you will see it in the presentation. But I would like to highlight one thing that is very important. The student should get information about how the information that he or she shares with you will be treated, that it's really going to be treated confidentially. The school that my children attend actually offer children some kind of confidential website. And when I talked to the children if anyone has ever used this, they said no, not really, because they do not know who actually reads the messages that are sent in there and how the information will be treated. So very often when children do not know what's going to happen, who will learn the information, or maybe even who needs to learn the information, may be an obstacle for the children to actually confess. In terms of creating safe environment, it's important to ask the child whether the child feels safe, and where is the place where, or what is the place where he or she feels secure, whether it's school or whether it's with one of the relatives, aunt, for example, in his or her friend's family. It's important to find out whether the child can safely prepare for school, because we had a case of a boy when we talked to the school, and we actually agreed that the boy could stay at school for 1 hour after the classes were over to do his homeworks and to study, because in his family the conditions were not good, and he never knew whether there would be more violence, more violent outbreaks at home. So this is very important as well. It is important to assure the child that he or she is not responsible for the violence and the aggression, and that it is not safe to interfere and intervene in the situation. So it's good to talk about how to behave when violence breaks out at home, where could be a safe space at home, where to go to be safe, whether there is someone to call to help, a neighbor, someone in the family. Maybe that there may be some situations when police should be called. And sometimes it may also be needed to discuss the situation with a student's parents. And here I would like to point out that you should never invite the aggressor and the victim or the affected parent together, to talk to them at the same time. Because if you want to figure out what's going on in the family, if you want to help, really, it's the best way is to approach the parent who is the victim according to the child. So you can invite invite the parent to talk about the child to school, about the school grades, etc. And then try to find out if the child feels safe at home and if the parent feels safe at home. And if needed, you can provide the parent with contacts for assisting organizations. You can also refer the parent to the Bright Sky application, and please note it down. This is a free of charge application that can be downloaded to any type of telephone, of handset, and it can be used by domestic violence sufferers, and also it can be used by witnesses or people, relatives who may be worried that someone is exposed to violence in their relationship. There are contacts for assisting organizations. There's also a questionnaire that includes risk factors, and it can be filled in by a person that may be affected by violence or abuse at home, but also by a person who is trying to help. And based on the information provided, it's possible to quickly assess the information. So I have come to the end of my presentation really quick, but if you have any questions concerning the information that I have just outlined, I'll be happy to answer your questions, and I'll be happy for your comments as well. These are my contacts. There's my phone, my email, so do not hesitate to contact me if you want to talk to me. And also, if you need help, if you need assistance, do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you for your attention.